The Climate Action Reserve is the most experienced and trusted offset registry to serve the carbon markets. As more organizations look to combat climate change and support environmental projects with true integrity, they turn to the reserve to foster real solutions and reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Through Carbon Connection, the Reserve's in-house experts will explore our high-quality standards for carbon offset projects and discuss climate change practices that benefit economies, ecosystems, and society. Thank you for joining. Hi, my name is Lauren Wilson, and welcome to our next episode of Carbon Connection, hosted by Climate Action Reserve. Today, we are speaking with our in-house expert, John Remicall, on our reforestation forecast methodology through our Climate Forward program. John serves as the Reserve's Associate Director of Nature-Based Solutions and has been deeply involved with supporting program implementation and project management activities of reforestation projects. John, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Lauren. It's great to be here with you today. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, John, my first question is, why is reforestation critical to addressing climate change?
There are a number of reasons why reforestation is critical. First, I would say is that, it's a very low-tech, essentially shovel-ready solution that's able to be implemented really easily. It's also relatively low cost, so it's easy to actually implement in that regard. And it's also it's a type of climate solution that people are really able to relate to and to understand, because everyone gets the idea of planting a tree and seeing it grow over time and understanding how that tree will absorb CO2 from the atmosphere and store it there over the long term. It's a little bit more difficult for some people maybe to understand that, there are these big machines that are being developed that could actually suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and convert that CO2 into something durable, it's a great solution, but it's not as easy for people to understand. Another reason why reforestation is really important is because it just presents a massive opportunity for climate mitigation. In the United States alone, the Nature Conservancy and American Forests have done some analyses that essentially show that there's a potential for 133 million acres of land that could be restored to forest cover, and that's just in the continental United States alone. And really interestingly, a lot of times we think of kind of the Western United States as having like really big opportunities for reforestation, especially these days when you think about wildfires that are causing these really big disturbances, where there's potential that they might not even recover to forest if there isn't some sort of human intervention to bring back tree cover. And while there are opportunities in the Western United States, there are even more opportunities in the Midwest and the Southeastern United States, I think in large part because of the history of the land use there, where there used to be this massive forest in the Southeast United States and into the Midwest and upper Midwest. And because of the agricultural history, a lot of that land was cleared. So it's now in either croplands or pasture. And pastures are actually the biggest opportunity in the United States, with millions of acres that could be potentially restored to forest cover over time. And then another thing that I think is worth mentioning too, as far as reforestation being really important for climate change, is removals, as we call, drawing carbon and CO2 out of the atmosphere, are something that are seen as increasingly more important, because even if we are able to lower our emissions or even halt our emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, there's still this excess burden of carbon dioxide that's going to remain there for a really long period of time. So people are looking more and more at the importance of focusing on actually taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And reforestation provides just that opportunity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. One analogy that I like to think of in terms of the climate crisis and how we're addressing the greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere is just this idea that the atmosphere is kind of like a bathtub, and we have both water coming in and water going out of the bathtub. Water going into the bathtub is, the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming out of smokestacks or tailpipes and other sources of greenhouse gases. And then we have the drain, the water going out, where it's being sequestered, where there's CO2 or carbon being sequestered in trees or being put into industrial-based sequestration solutions. And so while we're trying, a lot of the focus has been on slowing down or stopping the pace that water is even coming into the bathtub, we also need to make sure the water is draining out because we don't want the bathtub to be too full. So that's just one kind of nice and relatable way that I like to think about how we're addressing climate change and why removals are an important solution.
John, thank you so much. That was really insightful for us to understand why reforestation is so critical to helping address climate change, but also the opportunities that exist currently in the field. And I think with Climate Action Reserve, us developing the reforestation forecast methodology is one way that we're trying to put a solution out there. So I was wondering if you can share a little bit more about what the reforestation forecast methodology is through Climate Action Reserve's Climate Forward program.
Yeah, so just kind of in a nutshell, the methodology under Climate Forward is really recognizing the anticipated climate benefits of activities that are restoring forest cover to sites that have historically been under tree cover. And what we're talking about there are essentially tree planting or site preparation, or a combination of the two to bring back tree cover. The methodology itself covers basically the eligibility requirements, what kind of conditions have to be in place for a project to be eligible. It also describes what's required to quantify the credits that would be issued to a project. And then it also outlines what has to be reported to the reserve, as well as how projects are to go through what we call confirmation, which more people are more familiar with the term verification, but under Climate Forward, we use the term confirmation just to kind of separate it, because we are looking at auditing the claims around projected climate benefits in the future, whereas verification is typically associated with, what we consider to be ex post credits, where you are auditing the greenhouse gas benefits that have already been achieved by a project. So the methodology describes what has to be done for a project to be confirmed under a Climate Forward.
Thanks, John. Okay, so understand, yeah, looking through the methodology to see how we can sign up to projects and get more communities involved. And I think with that, how is this methodology impactful to communities, and what can communities expect to see as a result of implementing this methodology?
Yeah, so to the extent that we're able to successfully bring in a number of reforestation projects, there are some more direct benefits that reforestation projects provide in terms of, employing some people that are involved in the actual activities of planting trees or doing site preparation, or even developing a carbon project and going through that whole process of documenting it and going through the confirmation process, hiring confirmation bodies to do that. But beyond that, there's a whole host of co-benefits that reforestation in and of itself provides to the environment. And by providing benefits to the environment, it's providing indirect benefits to the communities as well. So there are impacts on wildlife habitat, there are impacts on water supply and water quality, especially in the Western United States, where there are a lot of locations that have not as much tree cover as they have had in the past, and with a changing climate where there is less. If you think of Northern California in particular, or the mountains in California, where they historically have received a good amount of snow during the winter, with the climate changing, where they're likely to be getting less snow during their winters, and then are having longer summers. The water supply and the timing of when the snow is melting and the water is coming down out of the mountains and filling up reservoirs is going to be more and more of an issue as the climate changes and we see some of those impacts on precipitation patterns. And so reforestation can help with that by providing some of that shading that will help the snow stay longer into the summer and help kind of spread out over time the snow melt, and will help kind of replenish those reservoirs over a longer period of time rather than having it kind of come in a shorter burst during the spring or the early spring. There are other impacts in terms of recreation as well and just aesthetics. So there's a whole range of benefits that reforestation projects can provide, benefiting both the environment and the communities that surround it.
Thank you, John. That's been so helpful to hear rather than, just understanding, planting a tree or going out and conducting reforestation activities. You've really connected the dots of how reforestation as a practice connects through the ecosystem, revitalizing the water and activities that wildlife can be brought back in. It's really exciting. And with that, Climate Action Reserve has been in the forestry space for quite some time, but with this methodology specifically, I'm wondering if you could share a little more about why this reforestation forecast methodology was developed.
Yeah, of course. So, as we've already kind of touched on, reforestation has this really big potential to help mitigate climate change. But as a project type, or an opportunity specifically to develop a type of carbon offset project, it's kind of had this one fundamental flaw to it. And that kind of stems from the fact that, traditionally offset programs have been developed over the years so that credits are being issued based on the amount of carbon that has been sequestered already. And the reason why that presents a problem, there's nothing wrong with that approach, and that's kind of the industry standard essentially. But it presents a very particular challenge to a number of types of climate mitigation opportunities, including reforestation. So if you think about the process of reforesting land, a landowner goes out and they go through all these activities, whether it's planting or site preparation or both of them. They have fairly significant costs when they're undertaking those activities. And under a traditional offset program, those landowners would then just have to essentially sit on those costs for a pretty long time, 10, 15, 20 years, before they would have enough carbon that's sequestered in the trees that are growing there to be able to have enough credits that could be issued as a result that would then not only pay for the costs that they initially had to conduct all the reforestation activities and maybe do the initial registration of a carbon project, but also to cover their costs to actually go through verification so that they could have those credits issued. And as we know, verification under a lot of programs these days is a fairly significant cost. So again, they have to wait kind of a long time before they can actually go through that verification process and have credits issued that they could sell. So most landowners don't want to sit on those kinds of costs for that amount of time. While there have been some projects that have been registered, reforestation projects that have been registered under traditional offset programs, it's just really been few and far between. There's this huge potential, as we've talked about, that still is sitting out there for reforestation to play a really big role in climate mitigation. And that's not to say that carbon markets are the only way that reforestation can or will be done, but carbon markets can play a pretty big role in stimulating those kinds of activities. And so what Climate Forward and the reforestation forecast methodology in particular do is that it offers this avenue for us to tap into the potential that's out there for reforestation, allowing those projects to be recognized essentially kind of in advance or at the start of when they're undertaking those actions, where they're removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We're recognizing, over the lifetime of the project, how much they're expecting to sequester and issuing all those credits up front. And in that way, they have those credits, within a matter of a year or so, rather than having to wait 15, 20 years or more before they have those credits to sell. And so that can make a really big difference. And that's what we're hoping the methodology will enable landowners to do, is to participate in carbon markets where they previously maybe have not been even considering it.
Thanks, John. No, I really appreciate that. It's really unique of this program that we're able to bring more actors into the carbon market now, as opposed to not having to wait if this forecast methodology maybe did not exist. So that's, I think, a huge goal of this program, is to really bring more actors into the speed, get offset credits generated through reforestation projects. That's really exciting. And you've touched on this a little bit, but I also wanted to ask you about permanence, since permanence is a real hot topic within the carbon market, and especially reforestation projects, and is a critical attribute to our programming. I'm wondering, how do we ensure permanence of greenhouse gas reductions for reforestation projects?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because permanence is such a critical factor for nature-based solutions in particular, when we're talking about sequestration, and especially for climate forward, where we are projecting the benefits that are expected to be produced by a project into the future, and we aren't requiring any long-term monitoring and reporting for those projects. We're issuing all those credits up front. So it's something that we had to think about really carefully when we were designing the reforestation forecast methodology, because we needed to make sure that we were able to address permanence concerns. And at the reserve, we have kind of a fixed standard of equating permanence to 100 years. So that provided us with at least kind of a foundation to work on. One of the basic changes that we are incorporating, or one of the basic concepts that we're incorporating, is something called ton-year accounting, which is essentially recognizing the time value of the carbon that's sequestered, if it's sequestered for, in particular, if it's sequestered for periods of time that are less than 100 years. So by incorporating ton-year accounting, we're able to essentially address the risk that under certain situations, we don't necessarily have guarantees that even if a forest is established today and it grows into the future, and we have reasonable assurance that it's going to grow into the future, at some point, there is market pressure that's out there, traditional timber markets that landowners might want to tap into. And so once trees reach a certain size, or if their growth rates slow down, a landowner could very well harvest their timber, and that represents a disruption to the carbon cycle there, where they are, or maybe not a disruption, but an acceleration of the carbon cycle, where there's carbon that's being released back into the atmosphere. And so ton-year accounting allows us to kind of address that risk head on. And so we incorporate ton-year accounting, limiting the crediting period lengths of those projects or those forest types to a certain period of time, and just saying, we expect there's going to be a harvest at year 50, or whatever the year might be for a given forest type. And we say, okay, at that point, we're going to cut things off, and we will only recognize the ton-year value that has been achieved by the carbon that's sequestered through 50 years. And so the way that kind of ends up playing out is, rather than having, if you have a forest, say, that sequesters 100 tons of carbon, and say you had 100 tons that were, sequestered in the first year of a project, rather than getting 100 credits for that amount of carbon that's sequestered, you would get 50 credits instead. Our approach to ton-year accounting is, we say, it's a simplified approach where we say, for every year that carbon is expected to remain sequestered, you get 1% of the full tonnage that is projected to be sequestered. So maybe rather than kind of belaboring the point, to make a long story short, by incorporating ton-year accounting and by limiting the crediting period lengths, we're able to address the risk to the permanence of the carbon stocks that are being sequestered. And we feel like that's a reasonable approach. Another way that we're able to address permanence is by providing for an option for projects to employ a conservation easement. And by doing that, what we're essentially doing is, even though we aren't requiring long-term monitoring and reporting of these projects, by incorporating a conservation easement, putting a conservation easement on their land and having specific terms that we require under the methodology, we're essentially guaranteeing that there's going to be that long-term monitoring, because the land trust or the easement holder is going to be doing monitoring on an annual basis of the lands that are under conservation easement. So by having specific terms that we require under the methodology, and then having those land trusts or the easement holder, the government agency that's holding the easement, doing that long-term monitoring, we kind of have really good assurances that that forest is going to continue growing into the future, and it will be forest, essentially. We also have something in the methodology to address kind of more typical concerns, or it's a more typical way to address permanence concerns like you see under traditional offset programs. A lot of people are familiar with the idea of a buffer pool. We have something that's essentially the same thing. We call it a permanence risk pool. And that's essentially every project that is registering is making a contribution of a certain percentage of the credits that would otherwise be issued. They're making this contribution to this risk pool, and those credits are essentially held back so that programmatically across all the projects that are being registered under Climate Forward, and all the reforestation projects in particular, we have this pool of credits that are essentially kind of providing a guarantee, so that if one project experiences a fire or some other sort of reversal of carbon that was being stored back into the atmosphere, we have good assurance that as a whole, the amount of credits that we have been issued has been essentially is covering any potential loss that that kind of disturbance represents. And then just generally, we also have a pretty conservative approach to quantification. So kind of along the same lines of having that kind of general buffer that we have, where projects are providing a buffer by contributing credits, we're also just kind of generally, in a sense, holding back credits that we're issuing to all projects just by having really conservative crediting to make sure that we're not over crediting, and that, again, the actual carbon that's likely to be sequestered in reality is not actually being fully credited under our methodology.
Great. Thank you so much, John. That was really helpful to understand permanence generally as a topic and how it works within Climate Action Reserve, but specifically with reforestation projects. I appreciate you going through how we are trying to establish assurances through the reforestation methodology. And lastly, what I'm curious to learn about is, with this methodology, who will be developing carbon offset projects, and who will be interested in purchasing the credits that are generated from such projects?
Yeah, so I think we are likely to see a lot of different types of landowners involved in this and submitting projects. And we've really tried to design the methodology to be user-friendly and very cost-effective. So we're expecting, we would see kind of what you might otherwise expect for forest projects in terms of larger landowners, whether those are timber companies or TIMOs or REITs, or tribal communities even. There are some tribal communities that have some of the largest projects that have been registered with ARB for improved forest management projects. But as we've talked about before, there are some barriers to entry with traditional offset programs. So by making this really cost effective, we're also opening the door to smaller landowners too, because of a lot of the efficiencies that we've built into the methodology. We've made some updates. The methodology has evolved. We're on to version 2 of the methodology, and we've included some updates to make the methodology more robust, which has brought in some additional measures that landowners have to take to register, to actually quantify their project. But even with those changes, the methodology is still a really cost-effective methodology, and we think it'll be financially feasible for landowners who want to register projects that are certainly in the range of hundreds of acres, if not down to tens of acres, depending on the exact project configuration in terms of the forest type that's involved, whether or not there's a conservation easement. Yeah, so there, and as well as the market conditions at the time, depending on the price of credits, that could also have an impact of how small the projects could potentially be. But so we see a full range of potential landowners that could be participating under this methodology. And then in terms of buyers, we see a number of different types of entities that are interested in FMUs, a number of different motivations. So that is, maybe they're looking to just simply bolster their ESG claims, kind of regardless of the specific quantity of FMUs that are associated with a project. Some entities are just looking to invest in activities that are helping to mitigate climate change, and they might not even care about how many credits they might get in the end. There are also entities in California in particular that are looking for local greenhouse gas mitigation opportunities because projects that are being developed, and I'm talking about any sort of activities like real estate development projects, or really kind of anything that's covered under California's Environmental Quality Act. They have to comply with greenhouse gas mitigation requirements under that act. And one thing in particular, that companies that are doing development projects that have to comply with CEQA, as it's called in California, one thing that they're looking for in particular are local mitigation opportunities. And so there are companies that are looking, especially in the wake of a lot of the wildfires, in particular the high severity fires and the mega fires that California has experienced recently. They're looking for opportunities for local mitigation. And in this case, under the reforestation methodology, they could be helping to restore these sites that have experienced these fires so that there are going to be forests there once again, even though those fires have made it so that it would be really difficult for trees to establish there again. So these projects offer that opportunity, and there are entities that are hoping to tap into that potential. And one other significant set of buyers, I would say, that has been emerging more and more lately is essentially companies that are looking to secure a future stream of offsets. This is something that it's really an opportunity that the market saw in climate forward projects and especially reforestation projects. And it's really something that we didn't see at the reserve initially. In all honesty, this climate forward was really developed kind of more focused on opportunities like CEQA. But the market quickly saw that there was this really big opportunity where someone could help to fund these activities like reforestation, buying these credits under a program like Climate Forward and getting FMUs, but setting it up in a way when they are buying these credits that they could essentially secure those credits that then could be transitioned to offset credits in the future. And we have modified our program and our methodology specifically to address that need that has been expressed by some of these buyers, where they want to have a pathway to convert FMUs to traditional offset credits, CRTs, under our program. So we have, with the changes that we brought into version 2 of our reforestation forecast methodology, we have built in that guidance that very specifically says you can transition projects and FMUs from Climate Forward to the reserve's voluntary offset program. And so we see that presents a huge opportunity that buyers are really interested in. And so I think we'll see a lot of entities that are looking to buy FMUs so they can secure that future stream of offsets.
That's a really huge and exciting update, being able to now transition FMUs to CRTs. I think a lot of people will be excited about that, and especially now that we have the version 2.0 of the reforestation forecast methodology. It seems like we've got a lot of work to be doing in the forestry space, and we're excited to be doing it. So, John, I just really want to thank you for your time today and walking us through the reforestation forecast methodology. And everyone, yeah, should be on the lookout for version 2.0, which is now published. And John, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. This is a lot of fun.